Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys yet again with your host and friendly neighbourhood attempting to remain as calm as possible, far-right thug, whose nickname is purely satirical. Those of you who take things a little bit too seriously, or anybody from the government or police who happens to be watching, George Cresswell. Friendly neighbourhood far-right thug, George Cresswell. Hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. This is the third time trying to record this because things have done nothing but go wrong in my attempt to get this started this evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've had audio issues, we've had cut issues, we've had incompetence from myself, which is nothing out of the ordinary. But first off, before we get to this episode, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to those who support the show via subscriptions, via comments, via liking the videos. And please, if you find something useful or you would like to spread the message, spread the perspective, so to speak. That's literally the tagline of my Instagram profile for this show, is a different perspective. Then please consider sharing either some of the clips that you may see or some of the full episodes if you think people could benefit from hearing a different perspective on these things. I think it's sorely needed. So thank you those who continue to support the show. And if you get value out of this episode, ladies and gentlemen, or if you get value out of any of the shows that we do, please consider sharing them. And obviously the more reach that we get, the more things we can maybe do with this in the future, more interviews we can do, more positive things we can maybe do for the country in the future. So anyway, getting into today's topics, ladies and gentlemen, first things first, speaking of sit down, speaking of interviews, speaking of all that stuff, I recently sat down with Mr. James Esses. James Esses, psychotherapist and founder of Just Therapy. And he founded Just Therapy off the back of settling a dispute with his university, who removed him from his master's program after pressure from ideologues, after pressure from radical left-wing ideologues who contacted his university. They weren't happy about some of the things which he was putting on social media, happy about a lot of the common sense that he was espousing. And he was removed from his master's program. Later on, pursued it. They settled out of court, but later on then went on to do his private practice and set up Just Therapy, which is a body of therapists who commit to their profession ideology free, and they have very different principles to a lot of the other therapists which you may find. It sadly seems that a lot of the therapists you may find nowadays, which if you are looking for a therapist, that means you have acknowledged that you have a problem that you cannot solve on your own and you need help, whether it's addiction, whether it's vice, whether it's all of these different things, right? No matter what it is, you've acknowledged that what you're doing is not working and you need serious help. And very likely you've got to the point where you're willing to pay somebody to take you through it. That's where you know that you're really in a bad place, okay? Because people don't like parting with their money, obviously, especially in the climate where people don't have a lot of money to part with. But at least you have acknowledged that you have a serious problem that's affecting one or more aspects of your life that you do not know how to solve, and you need help. And you'd like the person that you're going to be open and honest with you, to explore these things open and honestly with you, and not just take an affirmative, tell you what you want to hear, not challenge you in any way, not actually improve you in any way approach. But it seems as though that's what's going on with the therapy profession, with legislation coming through from the government and also the governing bodies, the big governing bodies for therapy in this country, mandating affirmative approaches to things like gender identity and stuff like that. And it seems that we're seeing corruption from many of the charities, quote unquote charities, so to speak, like Stonewall and Mermaids and all of these things, horrific things that they've been doing. And I recently sat down with James because he's been outspoken about this. Obviously, he's been cancelled for many different things, and he's come back from it. He's rebounded from it. And I wanted to sit down with him to discuss what's going on in the therapy profession, but also the ideological indoctrination of society as a whole. We had a great conversation that's available on all outlets now, ladies and gentlemen. But in case you were wondering about what sort of things we talked about, here is a little bit of a snippet of that conversation coming to you right now.
I felt that I had to speak out about it because I was concerned about children. That cost me my degree. It's a blight on society. And I've heard some horror stories of therapists bringing in their own political beliefs into the therapy room.
Has it got to the point where there's a good chance that if you reach out to a therapist, you could be greeted with like this affirmative approach rather than an approach that would be just and helpful?
I wish it wasn't the case, but I do actually think it might be. Actually, I think therapists have been only too willing to go along with a lot of this nonsense. I think a lot of them actually view themselves as activists in this space. It's not uncommon for straight white male clients to have it suggested to the therapist that they have white privilege. It's a strong term, but I stand by it, which is I think they're actually grooming children, mermaids or Stonewall. And even Childline, which is a branch of the NSPCC originally. I mean, they were sending out breast binders to young girls behind parents' backs, got a rap on the knuckles, and they're still running and they're still receiving donations. They've received public donations as well, I think through one of the National Lottery grants. So again, taxpayers' money, and so often it's not the silver bullet that they were promised it would be. He sent me an email, a very aggressive email, pulling out and essentially threatening to ruin me.
What was that experience like of being removed from the course, obviously, and then how obviously did you come back from that? It just these people have forgotten so much about the importance of free speech. In order to be able to think freely, you have to be able to speak freely. How important is free speech?
I think it's one of the most important things that we have. I don't think you can exist and thrive as a society without that. I try and offer support and reassurance and I guess motivation to fight back against these things, because it's the only way we're actually going to defeat it. I'm sure I'll get cancelled for having revealed this all over again.
There we are, ladies and gentlemen. So again, that's already been released. Full conversation is out for your viewing pleasure or your listening pleasure. And what we're getting into now, we're getting into the main topics of today's. Please go and check that out if you want, obviously, to go and listen to the full conversation. There's a lot more outside of that trailer that we talked about, things like what actually is conversion therapy and all of those things with the recent legislation and everything that's coming out. So it's a really great conversation. I urge you to go listen to it if you haven't already and watch it. So, getting on to the main topics of today, ladies and gentlemen. So in the last main episode that we talked about, which I believe was about the Casey report, and I'll get the title up on my phone a bit quick so you know the exact title of the last episode in case you want to go listen or watch that one as well. There was some startling data that we revealed in that episode from Operation Stovewood in Rotherham. So that is the episode titled The Casey Report Just Shattered All Illusions. I believe it's around diversity and multiculturalism. Yep, around diversity and multiculturalism. It's VOTV 22 if you want to go and watch it. But there was another article that semi-recently came out, at least across my X feed. I believe it was shared by David Atherton. I'm going to read you some bits from it now, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to be shocked by how far this goes back. This issue with regards to Pakistani grooming gangs and stuff like that goes back a lot further than what you would think. I've been quite vocal in saying it goes back to the 80s in large part, even some isolated incidents going back as far as the late 60s. These incidents, the startling thing is, these evidence, when you look at the historical context of Pakistani migration and early stage evidence for grooming gangs, this article, by the way, came out in XXIII in January of this year, goes back as far as the 50s. Goes back as far as the 50s in this country, when these people were still very, very small in population compared to how they are now. Talking when they were in the tens of thousands. And it goes back as far as that. That's what we're going to be looking at today, ladies and gentlemen. So this article is titled The Historical Context of Pakistani Migration and, quote, early stage, unquote, evidence of grooming gangs. So they start off by saying that in order to sustain the law in multicultural Britain, the state considered it necessary to apply the law selectively. Also, as we know, we've been calling this a two-tier system, which is absolutely true. You have people trying to call attention to these heinous crimes, were imprisoned, were cancelled, were character assassinated, were labelled as all different things, were threatened, in many instances killed. Okay? Not just victims of these grooming gangs as well, but also people who were trying to speak out about it. And they've not killed, at least threatened, and had to go into hiding at the very least. The government applied the law selectively. They applied a blatant two-tier system. In which case, if you were a person bringing these issues forward, you were an enemy of the state. But if you were a disgusting Islamic, migrant child rapist, you were you were a vote. You were a vote that the establishment wanted to count on because they wanted to devalue the vote that the ethnic British peoples have as determining their own future. Okay, they wanted to take the ability for the British people to select their own future away from them, democratically at least, take it away from them by importing votes to an extent where they can be outvoted as a bloc. And that's what you're seeing now in many instances where white ethnic British are simply, white ethnic British are simply minorities and they don't have a say. They don't have a say. They're often governed by foreigners. And you know you're an occupied country when foreigners hold the whip over the natives. That's how you know you're an occupied country. Okay, so we are an occupied country in many instances. Make no mistake about it. The rule of law was abandoned to sustain the myth that diversity is our strength, destroying the lives of thousands of vulnerable white working class girls in the process to the tune of potentially over 1.2 million. Okay. This appalling affair is the final nail in the coffin for liberals who still cling to the argument that Britain is an integration success story. No, it never was. And that's the big lie that we were told. This big lie we were told with the Windrush stuff, which obviously Clement Attlee, who was the Prime Minister at the time, threatened to send the ship away. Okay, we're told all of these things now. You called and we came. That's what these people now, these colonizers say about the Windrush generation, that we called them and they came. No, they came here seeking a better life. We never wanted them. We never wanted them. Make no mistake about it. We never asked for it. Okay, if anything, it was them that asked. It was them that nigh on demanded potentially, and we begrudgingly obliged them. That was what it was. This scandal started with the onset of mass migration, importing hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures who possess medieval attitudes towards women. That brought us here. After 30 years of this disastrous experiment, we now have entrenched sectarian voting blocs that make it electoral suicide for some MPs to confront this. Not even electoral suicide at sometimes, also potentially even just suicide themselves, because we know that these people have a propensity for violence. Scandal shows why we must end it. So, the statements, for example, from Robert Jenrick. So this article here highlights a statement from Robert Jenrick, where he said, was alleged to have said, the scandal started with the onset of mass migration. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to show now that is not true. That is not true. It did not start in 1997 when Tony Blair opened the borders and mass migration started. It did not start then. It was already a massively entrenched problem by then. That was just something which made it so much worse. Again, we already had the problem, and this was somebody, if we already had a bleeding wound, this was somebody chucking a bunch of sewage on top of it, effectively, getting a massive bucket and chucking a bunch of sluice on top of it. That's what this mass migration open border policy was. So the Alexis J report, for example, dates the onset of the mass rape atrocity to the 1970s, okay? At a time when Tony Blair was still an Oxford undergraduate playing guitar for the Ugly Rumours. However, this contention is what this article is going to highlight now is that it goes back even further than this. Like I said, to the early mid-50s, when the first waves of Pakistani immigration began after the passage of the 1948 Nationality Act. So therefore, the blame would not lie with Tony Blair, it would lie with Clement Attlee, who you would be, I doubt you would find a surprise, was a Labour politician. First, some context on Pakistani immigration to the UK. So, migration significantly intensified from the 1997 to 2010 period. Everybody who lives in this country knows this. Everybody who lives in this country knows this from how many communities have simply been upended and how much the demographic has changed like that. Data from the 1991 census shows that 94.86% of the population at the time identified as white British, with ethnic minorities making up about 5.35%, which overall was just about 3 million people. Okay? So overall about 3 million people. Whilst far smaller and more marginal than in 2025, still a sizable number. But here's some good points for you, ladies and gentlemen. Here's some good stats you might want to write down. Between 1951 and 2001, the Pakistani population in Britain experienced remarkable growth, increasing from 10,000 in 1951 to 119,000 in 1971. So in 20 years, it's gone up about, about 12-fold. About 12-fold in 20 years. Okay, very, very scary. By 2001, this number had reached nearly 750,000 people. Approximately 80% of British Pakistanis trace their origins to the Mirpur district of the Azad Jammu and Kashmir. This should surprise you, ladies and gentlemen, nothing. Should surprise you nothing. I know that sentence doesn't really make sense, but it shouldn't surprise you that this is where the majority of the Pakistanis involved in the rape gangs came from. So yeah, great. And then you wonder why there was so much uproar when foreign politicians in this country wanted to campaign for an airport to be built in Mirpur to make travel between Britain and Mirpur even easier. It's truly, truly disgusting. Oh, at British taxpayer expense, of course. Among Mirpuri emigrants, 71% visit their homeland annually, 67% regularly send remittances, and 79% express a desire to return permanently to Mirpur. Now, that last one is a glimmer of hope, maybe. Highlighting the strong transnational connections to Pakistan. That's fair enough. Obviously, everybody loves their homeland. Everybody loves their homeland. People should be careful with turning their, homeland into something idolatrous, potentially. But, it's good to have a connection to where you're from. This is where your roots are. Your family potentially goes back in these regions thousands of years. So it's good to have strong connections to where you're from. Nobody's saying that national pride, in some ways, is a bad thing. Too much pride in anything, really, getting prideful can be a very bad thing. There's a reason why it's called a cardinal sin, for example. But there's nothing wrong with being proud of where you come from and wanting your home country to be good and be a place that you like. Nothing wrong with that. As such, the culture of Pakistan exists on a continuum between the state of Pakistan and parts of England with large Pakistani populations, such as Bradford or Rochdale. One example was the murder of an Ahmadiyya shopkeeper in Glasgow by a Sunni Pakistani man from Bradford because of sectarian hatreds from Pakistan. So again, this is where Douglas Murray was very put a great phrase together to describe this: is when you import the world's people, you import the world's problems. It's very sad now that a lot of people who don't get along in these regions, and this is where people that have a read on the Middle East and places like that at the moment, where they're reading this as, if the West simply stayed out of everything, it would be fine and all of this stuff. Well, these people don't get along anyway. Many of these people don't get along anyway. They have religious conflicts. They have intrapersonal conflicts within these regions, okay? It's not exactly a peaceful kumbaya region of the world where these people are coming from. And that is without our involvement. That is without our involvement. So no, it's not just down to us, but with importing bunches of these people for political reasons, what the political class have done is brought these sectarian conflicts to us when we never asked for them. We never asked for them. We never asked for Muslim gang warfare on the streets of Glasgow. We never asked for grooming gangs in Cardiff. We never asked for all the mosques and shit. We never asked for it. This was inflicted on us without our consent. And now we have to deal with it, though. We have to deal with it. And it makes you laugh then when at the moment you've got a massive fence that has recently been erected, I believe, around Parliament. I believe it's around Parliament. Literally came out like today, this photo of this brand new fence that's just been erected around Parliament. And you've got to take into account how many tens of thousands of migrants come into this area. And yeah, the political class are obviously very concerned with protecting themselves. They don't care about anything that goes on outside of those fences because they just see these people as Untermenschen or, again, not even worth listening to. That's the treatment they gave to all these girls that allowed these atrocities to take place. They, arrested fathers and all of this stuff. But they'll make sure they're safe, locked away in their ivory castles, as is the way that socialism always goes. Pakistan is one of the worst places in the world to be female, with little recourse to justice. Reported cases are described as, quote, tip of the iceberg by officials due to societal stigma and fear of retributive violence. As has been documented and evidenced in many grooming gang cases across the United Kingdom, this widespread sexual violence became entrenched, likely to this day, in towns and cities across England when it was never here before. Never here at this scale before. Now you have. And again, it shows you how much how we have to hold ourselves accountable for this to an extent as well, that we allowed these things to become entrenched, not just in the sense that we didn't do anything about it physically, but how we went along with the language, how when people called these child prostitution incidents, right, they called it child prostitution, people like Stephen Fry and stuff like that, they called them child prostitutes. Instead of saying young British girl raped by 100 men, who say young British girl slept with 100 men. 14-year-old slept with 100 men. The disgusting, slimy media that changed those words. Such small things that they changed. And changing such small things that have massive ramifications, ladies and gentlemen, is a subject of an interview which is in the editing stages at the moment, which is going to be very important that you listen to coming up very, very soon. But the fact of the matter is, We never asked for this. We never asked for this. It was inflicted upon us without our consent. And then we were gaslit into believing that it wasn't happening and everything that was happening was a good thing. That diversity was our strength. That diversity built Britain and all of this stuff. All of this bullshit. In Pakistan, the rate of consanguineous marriage, particularly first cousin marriage, ranges between 38 and 49%, with higher rates in rural areas. Among British Pakistani, studies in Bradford show that 37% of Pakistani origin babies were born to first cousin parents, with 59% having consanguineous parents. So, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that right, ladies and gentlemen. But imagine this. In Bradford, a quaint British town, quaint English town, 37% of these babies born to first cousin parents. Now, people will just look at that, people will hear that, and they'll think that nothing's wrong. Something is seriously wrong. And remember, we never asked for this. So something needs to be done about it. Because you've got to take into account, what if the complications occur from the result of these babies being born? You know, that then the British taxpayer has to pay up for that through the NHS. And there was something that was found outside of a hotel. It was something that was found outside of a Derby hotel that should really piss you off in a minute, ladies and gentlemen, but we'll come to that at the end of the show. Migration of Mirpuris to Britain was driven primarily by economic reasons, particularly after the 1960s, when over 280 villages were submerged for the Mangla Dam construction, displacing over 110,000 people. So, as one example, the city of Bradford, by 1944 to 45, there was an estimated 30, not 30,000, not 30 million, 30, what were called Indo-Pakistanis at the time in the city. By 1964, so again, 20 years later, you then had a total population of about 296,000, with about 12,000 residents being Pakistani. Pardon me. 5,000 of whom originated from Mirpur. This sort of growth is typical for towns and cities in the North and Midlands of England with large Pakistani population by 2025. By 1970, the Pakistani population of Bradford was estimated at 21,000, and by 21, the Pakistani population of the Bradford Metropolitan District totaled nearly 140,000. So again, these are not, I don't think you can call these in many ways natural changes, natural emigration changes. This has been pure demographic replacement in a lot of instances. And it should surprise you that Bradford, for all its status as the city of culture, right, should not surprise you as one of the least safe and one of the areas where this diversification and multiculturalism has led to a lot of young girls being sacrificed on that altar. Shouldn't surprise you. Pakistani grooming from the 1950s onwards, however. So this is where we start getting into the meat and potatoes of this article, ladies and gentlemen. Through documented stories from the British Newspaper Archive, there are a comprehensive list here of news reports indicating that organised child grooming and sexual abuse by Pakistani males was entrenched as early as the 1950s, as early as 1955. Whilst this is not scientific data or analysis, many of the stories demonstrate that the sexual abuse was a feature of migration ever since the first pioneer settlers arrived following the Second World War. So, for example, ladies and gentlemen, 1955, you have, shouldn't surprise you, Bradford grooming gangs. Sadly, I can't pull up the actual thing from the register itself. It's very sad. It's very, very sad. In the article, you'll be able to find all of these linked, by the way, down in the show notes below, ladies and gentlemen. 4 Bradford-based Pakistani men, this is in 1955, appeared at Bradford City Court accused of having carnal knowledge of a 15-year-old girl from Middlesbrough. Carnal knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, relates to sexual knowledge, desires, needs, that kind of stuff. You've got to think, why are these 4 Pakistani men in Bradford having that knowledge of a 15-year-old girl? First clear grooming case. It happened in Bradford, where there has still not been a wave of prosecutions for grooming, and in 2025, Bradford Council again refused Robbie Moore MP's demand for an inquiry. This should surprise you none, ladies and gentlemen. And the Lord Mayor or rather the Lady Mayoress of Bradford Council, is Mrs. Naheed Akhtar. And she was born in Mirpur, Pakistan. And you had the Lord Mayor, Councillor Mohammed Shafiq, born in village Doral, Mirpur, Pakistan. I don't think we're going to see an inquiry coming out of Bradford anytime soon. But this is your 2025 City of Culture, ladies and gentlemen. These people cover for their own. We've told you that time and time again. These people cover for their own. They're purely sectarian. They're here to take over. And they need to go. Of 1959, or rather 1957, girl in Kent with bad company from Pakistan. So you have 13-year-old Pauline Beach of Camden Road and 14-year-old Anne Lawrence of Forest Road have been missing since Wednesday. Their mothers suspect the girls may have gone to London, possibly to meet a Pakistani acquaintance. Although Anne has run away before, this is the longest she has been gone, and both mothers fear that bad company may be involved. How racist! How racist! How Islamophobic! All of these things, right? For noticing that these people may not be the best company for your 13 and 14-year-old daughters. In many instances, the media went along and said that they were these young girls' boyfriends, as if it was completely normal. And that's why that conversation with James was so important as well, ladies and gentlemen, not directly pertaining to this, but how normalized people have tried to make this, how normalized people have tried to make these kinds of disgusting relations and what's going on. The fact that people hear about these things, and in order to keep their multicultural diversity narrative intact, they have to pretend that this is normal. Should tell you how fucked up some people in the head are and how much they need to be prayed for. 1959, grooming in Keighley, West Yorkshire. It's still not letting me pull it up. Damn it. It's still not letting me pull up these articles. I'll have to see if I can find them. Maybe we can read some of these in more detail later. Or in a future episode. In a statement to a policewoman, a 16-year-old Colne girl admitted she had drank 6 gin and oranges in a Keighley hotel. Afterwards, or Keighley, however you say it, afterwards she went out with a 30-year-old Pakistani and did not return home that night. The girl appeared before a juvenile panel yesterday as being in need of care and protection and exposed to moral danger. Chairman, Mr. R.J. Walker, described the case as, quote, the worst in my 20 years experience. A supervision order was made for 3 years and the girls were warned to keep off the drink and stay away from these people in Keighley. The worst I've ever seen in my 20 years. I can imagine how this was perceived back then when people at least still had some loose grip on morality. Now, as I said, it's been tried to be normalized. At least then when people realized this was actually a moral danger at the very least back then. But this speaks as well, ladies and gentlemen, about the role, and I spoke to this with Tim in my conversation with Tim Davis a little while ago. I believe it was back in January, that was. And he recently appeared on Andrew Gould's Heretics as well. Really, really good to see him go from strength to strength to strength as well. Tim's had his own experience with cancellation and stuff like that as well. He's been open about the ideological corruption of the RAF and stuff like that. How they brought in diversity and it really harmed the RAF. That the role of the parents, all these parents, a lot of these young girls were going back to these predators for some kind of companionship, because again, they were not only plying them with stuff and giving them these like gifts of like drugs or cigarettes, drink, all of this stuff. That their parents wouldn't, parents being at least hopefully somewhat moral, upstanding people and caring about their children, not wanting them to get hooked on these things, knowing that they're inappropriate for children, all these kinds of things. And they would then go back to them. They would then go back to them in some instances. And that's really, really sad. That's really, really sad. And that's a damning indictment on how far we've strayed as a moral society and what we really need to do to get back on track. And this is a spiritual battle. Make no mistake, this is not just a physical battle or a cultural battle, a political battle. This is a spiritual one. Devil is running roughshod in our communities right now, and we need to take that seriously. Grooming in Halifax in Yorkshire. A 15-year-old, this is in 1959, appeared before Halifax Juvenile Court where Superintendent L. Masses gave evidence indicating that her parents were aware she was associating with a Pakistani man referred to in court as Mr. X, having admitted she was, quote, exposed to moral danger. She was sent to a remand home for 3 weeks. Superintendent Masses noted the girl clearly needed better care and protection, highlighting inadequate parental supervision. Case in point of what I just said. Case in point of what I just said. Grooming gang in Nelson in Lancashire, this is from 1960, is claimed that a 13-year-old girl and her 17-year-old friend were indecently assaulted in a house in Nelson. The perpetrators, described as Pakistani men, were jailed following the incident, so we can assume that they were convicted. Well, nothing else where it says back in 1955 that they appeared before the court. It doesn't say that they were convicted or not. In 1960, you had Pakistani men, gangs of them, being convicted for these crimes. So at the very least, we can say that these incidents go back as far as 1960. 1960 is a date. We have a case of it. This case also has evidence of trafficking as the girls were moved to a house in Bradford. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that just occurred with the mass migration of Tony Blair. This goes back to prime ministers just after the Second World War. This goes back to Clement Attlee with the Nationality Act, as these guys point out. 1962, 14-year-old, quote, lived with Pakistani. A 14-year-old girl who ran away from home and lived with a Pakistani man for 2 weeks was returned to her parents by West Hartlepool Juvenile Court and placed under probation service for supervision for 2 years. She was discovered by a policewoman, Sylvia Ward, in a West Hartlepool house occupied by several Pakistani men. It emerged that the girl had travelled there after meeting the man in a coffee bar and was instructed not to reveal her real age. In case you're wondering about the moral upstandingness of these people that we've imported. Faversham Grooming Gang, 1962. 3 Pakistani men were given sentences by their own, quote, community for the rape of a 15-year-old girl, quote, who was not without experience of men. This is truly disgusting stuff. 17-year-old in 1963, living with a Pakistani male who assaulted her in Nelson. Jacqueline Edwards, 17, from Nelson, and her 2 friends were accused of stealing a tape recorder from the home of Lumakta Awan, where Edwards had been living for a few months. They claimed they only borrowed the recorder and intended to return it, but feared Awan might harm them. After hearing the evidence, including allegations that one of the girls was assaulted, the magistrates ended up dismissing that case. Another Nelson grooming gang in 1964. 14-year-old girl from Nelson, known to be associated with Pakistani men and women of, quote, dubious character, unquote, appeared before a juvenile panel as a young person in need of care and protection. A teacher noted the girl seemed unhappy at home and was drawn to the Pakistani community, spending time in a cafe owned and frequented by them. Court placed her under supervision for 2 years. Again, parents, this is where you have your duty. This is where you have your duty. To make sure that your children are safe and to know, as much as they might not want you to, who they're associating with. And it's even more important now because the problem has only grown. And make no mistake, as more and more people come in, as more and more people from these communities come in, they're only going to be more and more emboldened to do it more. They're only going to be more and more emboldened to go on their ethno-religious conquest even more. If it hasn't hit your community yet, A, it might have hit your community and you just might not know it. And B, it's coming. Unless we do something about it. Remigration is a kindness for these people. Oldham Grooming Gang, 1966. A 30-year-old Pakistani man, Mohammed Habib, was accused of assaulting a 13-year-old girl in Oldham, Lancashire, after providing alcohol, gin and vodka to 2 boys and 2 girls. Superintendent David Rees described the incident as part of a broader issue in the area where men buy drinks for young people to take advantage of them. Habib, who pleaded guilty, was remanded with a recommendation for deportation. I don't know whether he doesn't say whether he did get deported or not. This is also an indication of grooming in Oldham going back to the 1960s, the place where Jess Phillips is refusing to hold an inquiry. Jess Phillips, absolute demon-possessed person that she is. We also, ladies and gentlemen, have systematic Pakistani grooming, obviously dating back to the 1950s. And also alongside this, many examples of aggravated sexual violence against teenagers and young women from Pakistanis from 1950s onwards. So you have 1950 attempted murder in Wales. So this is a newspaper clipping that's been added to this website. I'm not going to show it on screen, but I'm going to read it to you, ladies and gentlemen. So it says, Pakistani accused of murder attempt. A 24-year-old Pakistani said to have written quote, pretty affectionate letters to a Cardiff woman was at Cardiff Magistrates Court yesterday, alleged to have wounded her with intent to murder her. After an all-day hearing, the case against Muhammad Ali, presumably not the boxer, of Howard Street, Bradford, who was charged with attempting to murder Janet Ada Buttriel of Boot Street, Cardiff, was adjourned until today. Ali was also charged with attempting to commit suicide, presumably because he knew that he would be guilty, presumably because he knew that he would be found guilty. The evidence was so stacked against him. And then obviously he would have done it. I don't know. As far as I know, this it just says that he appeared at court. I don't think it says that he was actually convicted. So again, this happened in 1950, so good chance that both these people are dead. I don't know. Miss Buttrill said that she remembered being with Ali in her room the day before the alleged attack, but could not recall any of the incidents of the evening when she was injured. And then it just, pardon me, says pool of blood in bold quotes at the bottom of the clipping. We also have 1960. A man follows a 16-year-old girl in Nelson, Lincolnshire, pulls her into a back street and assaults her. 1961. Girl mauled by Pakistani in Trafalgar Square. Also 1961. Pakistani immigrant in Nelson attempts to harass two girls and a frightened woman scared off by a Mr. Smith. Fast forward is more again. Pakistani rapes child in Reading, 1966. 1974, Pakistani men charged with abduction and gang rape. 1972, rape of two girls by Pakistani males in Buckinghamshire after accepting a lift home from two Pakistani youths. High Wycombe, 11.8 Pakistani is yet to have an inquiry. Fast forward then 1975, 18-year-old raped multiple times by two Pakistani men identified as Mohammed Riaz and Mohammed Riaz at a flat in Newcastle. She was picked up in a taxi. Do not get in a taxi if you're on your own today, ladies and gentlemen. That is your public service announcement for today. Do not get in a taxi for your own. They use these as the eyes and ears of cities in particular. If you live in a city, do not get in one of these taxis on your own. And you will have to do some discrimination that you will end up trying to, feeling bad about because of how much this societal indoctrination has set in. You will have to. It is a basic survival instinct at this point. I mentioned before, I know somebody who had a run-in with these people and was very lucky not to have something very traumatic happen to them. Luckily, they were able to fight off and escape. Do not use taxis and stay in groups. If you're going on a night out in somewhere like Cardiff nowadays, it is not safe. It's not safe, and it's been made deliberately so. You stay in groups, you watch each other's drinks, and you always keep your wits about you. It doesn't pay to be a drunkard in today's society because you will get taken advantage of. Or at least people will attempt it. Disproportionately from these backgrounds. If you don't want to be a victim of this ethno-religious conquest, you need to start enacting some kind of discipline upon yourself as well. You shouldn't have to, in a way, because these people shouldn't be here. But that's where we are at the moment, and until we get it sorted, you need to enact some basic disciplines. Please, ladies and gentlemen, don't be a statistic. Don't be a statistic. In 1975, 18-year-old held prisoner and raped by Pakistani. This cannot be allowed to just be washed under the carpet. Nigel Farage won't touch this. Nigel Farage won't touch this. He's sleeking into becoming an SW1 monster, swamp monster. Nigel Farage won't touch it. Tice won't touch it. None of them will touch this. But something needs to be done. And frankly, after everything that's been allowed to happen, after all of the gaslighting that we've had to endure as a people, after how much we've been taken advantage of, after how much has been stolen from us and our futures have been stolen, how much we've been indoctrinated into believing that this is okay, that this is the way Britain's always been, and we should just get used to it. Further and further into Islamo-fascism. Something needs to be done. And all of us need to start standing on principle. And all of us need to stand together. Otherwise, we will lose. And we don't just stand to lose a football match here. No, we stand to lose our entire country, our entire way of life, our entire people, our entire ancestry, culture, freedom. This is not something to be taken lightly. And even if you see yourself as an apolitical liberal, doesn't affect me, little bunny, this does affect you. If it hasn't affected you yet, it will. You may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. You may not care about the government, and you may think that this is just something, oh, well, that's just the way it is. What are we going to do? Well, that kind of attitude is definitely going to secure our downfall. Because if you won't even stand up and address it, if you can't even bring yourself to seeing that there's a goddamn fucking problem and that we should all be doing something about it, then we've already lost. If you need a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, of some of the things that we've been dealing with, there's the kind of stuff that we've been dealing with. So this is from the Heretics podcast I mentioned just before. And these are not just gangs, as you know. These are not just gangs. This is a community issue. This is an issue at the familial level for these people. This is family members covering for each other. This is people coming together in enclaves to protect these heinous criminals, to protect these enterprises that were going on. The police were on their side. The police were chasing concerned fathers who wanted to rescue their daughters from these gangs. This is the kind of stuff that was going on. And it's important to know how people who were involved in these things see us as a people, see you. Just have a listen to this. This, I believe, is a Sikh gentleman. He's one of the earliest exposers of these grooming gangs. Now, have a little listen to this. Just watch your stomach. It may churn.
How prevalent are the Muslim grooming gangs?
I'd say I don't blame the whole Muslim community. That would be very silly of us to do that. But there are a high percentage of Pakistani sexual grooming gangs. Now, I would like to use another word for it, but obviously certain words we can't use. These are groups of people. These are people known to each another. They're not gangs where friends have got together and stuff like that. If you look at the very dynamics of these are people known to them. These are family members. These are relatives. It's quite scary. So I wouldn't blame the whole community, but there is a high percentage within that they thought these girls were easy pickings and easy prey, and they've gone for them. And it's horrible with some of the crimes that some of the stuff that the girls went through.
It is. It's truly disgusting, some of the things that these girls went through. We're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking like broken bottles, being used akin to sex toys here. We're talking this kind of torture. We're talking branding. We're talking pumps being used to expand young girls' anal cavities. That's what we're talking here, ladies and gentlemen. We're not just talking, not banal, but we're not just talking your bog standard rape here. We're not even talking just a regular, trafficking operation where you traffic girls to a house, and they're all trained basically. But by train, I mean, man after man after man, and they will just come in and just normally, just having non-consensual intercourse with them, which is already a disturbing enough mental picture. If you're not put off by that, you need to go and have your head checked. You need to go and have your head checked. If that visual of a young girl being used as a sex slave does not just make you murderous with rage. But we're not even talking that. These girls were viewed as lower than animals. These girls were viewed as lower than dogs. You know, they were viewed truly as the lowest of the low. And so that's why everything was fair game. Everything was fair game and everything was good. You know, these are the daughters of the infidels. You know, they disrespect our prophet. They do all these things, right? They're not like us. They, you know, reject our customs and all of these things. Yeah, I wonder why. And I'm back. Apologize, my camera did not want to focus. So I kind of lost my train of thought there for a minute. But these girls were viewed as lower than the lower than low, like lower than animals. You know. And remember, about 2.5%, 2.5 to 4% responsible for nearly 2/3 of these abuses. But again, this is the kind of stuff that we're talking. We're talking torture. We're talking trafficking, torture. Drugs plied where they were basically turned into zombies some of the time with the drugs and the alcohol that they were given. They were urinated on. They were kept in cages. As I said, if this doesn't make you angry, ladies and gentlemen, you really do need to go and have your head checked. And from this clip, ladies and gentlemen, we have we're not done with this clip just yet. We have a really horrendous ending to this clip. So viewer discretion advised.
What's
Treating young people as objects and below how they treat animals. Where are they getting that? Where are these people getting that? I was talking to a father only about 4 days ago whose daughter's insides have been ripped out completely and she can't have any children. You know, so what kind of mindset that you have to be so depraved to do something like that? And that just doesn't destroy the child. It destroys the whole family unit. It messes everybody up in the family, the mother, the father, the extended family.
Yeah, think about it now. She's not going to be able to have any children that she wants. It's going to put a strain on her future relationships. If she, you know, eventually she'll likely she gets into an actual loving relationship with a man, right? Let's just say that. And that's taboo to say nowadays. You know, saying that heterosexual relationships are good, but and then he will inevitably start thinking about children because this is the purpose that really drives men in life. It's their family, you know, and want to have a family, knowing that the wife's going to be there to raise the kid. That's the thing that drives them, right? And now that's gone. They've robbed her and his parents of grandchildren, potentially, at least biological ones. You know, the only way they're going to be able to continue any family is through adoption. And the thing is now that if you think about it, the bloodline there, unless it's obviously going to be continued through if they have another son, like if she has a brother or something like that. But that's say their only child, their only daughter, and she can't have children anymore. She'll never be able to bear them. Well, that's the end of their bloodline. It was forcibly taken away from them by a disgusting Pakistani paedophile that had no business being here. That's the level of treason we're talking here, ladies and gentlemen. That's the level of treason and gaslighting and evil that we're talking about with regards to our government that have inflicted on us, going back as far as the 50s. Going back as far as the 50s. It's truly, truly disgusting. It should make you even more sick. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, not only is this going on, but that politicians, such as two men here, Dominic Cummings and Ed Balls, that were at the heart of Conservatives and Labour, whilst this was all going on, or at least throughout a period where all this was going on, discussing now openly if and how these issues could have been exploited for political capital. Truly, truly disgusting, ladies and gentlemen. But this is the British political class and what they think. This is what they think of the victims and people that went through this and their families. The only thing they were thinking of is how the Uniparty, one aspect of it, could weaponize it against the other side while still securing the same outcome, which is the same tyranny that we've been exposed to and been forced to go along with in the UK for however long I can remember, certainly since I've been born.
But at that time, this wasn't coming across the desks of cabinet ministers. I mean, I don't know whether you ever had any dealings with it. I didn't.
I didn't directly. I mean, there was definitely, there was the emerging prosecutions in places like Rotherham. And I guess there was a sense in Conservative circles that, this was embarrassing for Labour because these areas were run by Labour councils, that the Labour councils often drew a lot of support from the local Pakistani origin community, that they didn't want to kind of call it out. There was definitely, but we never thought that was something that you could sort of politically exploit, frankly.
Really? But I would have thought if you thought this was something...
That's what they're concerned with, ladies and gentlemen. How this issue can be politically exploited. That the Labour, just we know, they basically relied on these Pakistani Muslims for their entire vote, at least for a period of time before they got so big that they started electing their own candidates, which surely even the most short-sighted politician could have seen coming. That again, they're discussing how they can politicize it. Not again about solving the problem, about politicizing it. Speaks to the entire problem with the UK establishment right here. Right here. These are the face of the treasonous... These are the faces, or these are some of the faces of the treasonous regime that don't care that this atrocity has been allowed to take place. They don't care. Their daughters, sons, whatever, are protected. Nothing bad is ever going to happen to them. They catch a cold, it's the working class that dies of pneumonia. They catch a cold, they catch a cold in the form of a slight media scandal, that nobody even really cares about. It's the working class that catches the pneumonia and black plague of mass migration and the rape of Britain. And they don't care. They've openly voiced contempt for everybody that's tried to talk about this. They assassinated their characters, assassinated their reputations. Everybody that tried to talk about this was labelled as a racist, as a far right, all of this stuff, right? Just for trying to raise these perfectly valid concerns and bring these to light. And all the while, you just have politicians at the top with their, exorbitant wages, as it always is in a socialist system, wondering, how can we get some capital, get some return off the back of this? You don't hate the establishment enough, ladies and gentlemen. You don't hate the establishment enough. And we've got more stories of things like this coming to you now, ladies and gentlemen. So here's a lady from Hertfordshire, believe it is, who was threatened by a migrant after he just went and sexually assaulted a 60-year-old woman in, Verulamium Park in St. Albans. After, and she didn't know it at the time, a migrant sexually assaulted a 60-year-old woman in this park. The lady you're about to hear from is approached by him, and he demands, "You now come and fuck me." That's what he says. "You now come and fuck me." She tells him to leave our women and girls alone, and she could see by the look in his eyes he was looking for a female to rape, and he then walks up to two young girls, and she had to intervene, potentially to her great danger. And it just seems that the police didn't want to do anything about it. Apparently she contacted Hertfordshire police. They were going to see her, but the police officer's supervisor blocked it, probably didn't want to be seen as racist and stereotyping, so to speak, and told them not to bother with it. and he's out on bail now for the earlier sexual assault. Here is the account of this incident for you now, ladies and gentlemen.
An immigrant assaulted a 60-year-old woman in my local park in Hertfordshire on the 10th of April at between 1 and 2 p.m. On the same day, unbeknown to me at the time because it's only just come out in the press, same day, that day at 4:30, 4:45, I'm walking the dog and I'm throwing the chuck-it ball and I sense a bloke. It's a very big, massive park, open space. There's no need for someone to be in your personal... Anyway, he came right up behind me and he's gone to reach over to touch my shoulder, but I've whizzed around. He said, "You now come fuck me. We go. We have sex." So I said what I said. Okay, don't need to tell you what I said to him. But it was harsh. And I told him to fuck off and leave the women in this country alone. But he was glazed. He was glazed. He wasn't on drugs or anything. He wasn't inebriated, but he wasn't there. He was.
Honestly, one thing though, ladies and gentlemen, 2 seconds before we get into the rest of that clip, because there is more to come on that clip. Honestly, yeah, sure, we should watch what we say in the sense that there are forces greater than us that are always watching and always listening. Yeah, sure, but honestly, with everything that's been allowed to happen, who gives a fuck so much about words at the moment? You're thinking about hurting this guy's feelings. Who gives a fuck at this point? Nobody gave a fuck about our feelings when 1.2 million young girls were being raped, people were trying to raise the alarm, people lost jobs, lost careers, lost lives, lost any kind of social standing because all of their friends and family were indoctrinated into believing that this was somehow okay, this was normal, and that these people were just racist and evil, despite the fact that the real evil was going on, people that did not want to acknowledge it. I'm sorry, I don't give a fuck about some hurty words. That is not the problem here. Problem here is you have people that have no business being here going up to women like this lady and going up to children as well, and acting in this way. People that have no business being here, that have had the stamp of approval from some fucking globalist, whether it be Prime Minister or whoever, Ursula von der Leyen, frigging Cruella de Vil lookalike, right? I said, oh yeah, you can be here and you're just as native as the people that have lived here for thousands of years. No, you can get fucked, and hurty words are not exactly high on the priority list.
Glazed. He was focused, and the way I relate, and I think I'm right, is that he was focused on finding a woman to rape. Anyway, what he did then is he ignored me and walked straight over to two young girls on a bench, two schoolgirls. So I charged at him, and I'm walking backwards with my arm in front of him to say, "Don't you dare, don't you dare," and I'm shouting back to the girls and saying, "Get your phones out, take pictures quickly."
Yeah.
So I got in
advice.
between them. He didn't get near them. I managed to deflect. So he's walked the other way and he's walked off, but he's walked towards a children's playground. Now, can you imagine? I'm not a bloke. I've got a little dog with me. I did feel like I should have done more. I did enough, everyone's telling me, but I felt like I should have done more and followed him. Do you know what I mean?
So then there you go. So he's heading off towards a children's playground. You then have this woman feeling guilty. You have this woman feeling guilty for doing a good thing, for trying to help these two girls, keep them safe after she's just had this horrific ordeal herself. And then she's feeling guilty. She's feeling guilty, feeling that she couldn't do enough. Or she didn't do enough. When in reality, what much could she do? If this man wanted to get violent, wanted to have his way regardless, odds are he probably could. Odds are he probably could, and none of them would have very much of a say in it. Because say what you want, say what feminism will teach you, there's no difference between men and women. Yes, there is. Yes, there absolutely is. And odds are, short of a weapon being used of some kind, or short of a, 1 in 1,000 scenario of one of the girls to get a lucky shot, a lucky incapacitating shot or something like that, odds are it's not going to go very well for the woman in this scenario. And I hearken this back when I said that about the people who benefit most from strict gun controls are criminals, namely the criminals in government, but also criminals that will have guns no matter what. And I got some comments on one of the shorts, which really, really baffled me. And I was saying, like, look, advocating for a armed citizenry is never stupid because of instances like this. And because of instances like I drew on, where you had the hypothetical of a woman home alone, and one of the big determinants from Sammy the Bull Gravano, for example, ex-mobster, by the way. Ex-mobster used to be the underboss of the Gambino crime family, okay, knows a thing or two about how criminals think. One of the biggest things that's going to deter a person is thinking, is there a firearm in the house or not that she's going to be able to use and blast him away? If there's not, which in many instances in homes throughout the UK, there's not going to be because we have very strict gun controls, you have very little deterrence. You have very little deterrence because he knows that he's going to win the strength battle. He knows that he's going to win the strength battle 9.9 times out of 10. Because there are physical differences between men and women, and feminism is the most destructive lie that has ever been sold. Feminism is the most destructive lie that's ever been sold. And I think more and more women now are realizing that. More and more women are realizing that. Because she realizes here just how powerless she is. How powerless she is if this migrant wanted to do whatever he wanted to do. And there's another instance here coming out of France, for example. France woman is allegedly told her outfit is quote-unquote haram, which means forbidden in Islam. The girl, who is wearing a cross necklace, responds, "It's a good thing, I'm Christian." I'm surprised that didn't trigger this kind of disgusting bloodlust in whoever this man is off-screen telling her that his outfit is haram. Because, they have to dress their women up like letterboxes in order to keep their disgusting lusts in check and all things like that, right? This incident happened at a music festival 2025 in Paris, which saw widespread violence and 371 arrests. In addition, nearly 150 women were jabbed with hypodermic needles during the famed festival, known as Fête de la Musique. Jabbed attacks mark a new crisis for this festival. This is courtesy of Remix News on X, but here is this lady, again, having to deal with the fruits of diversity, of multiculturalism, again, ladies and gentlemen, which it should be second nature by now. It should be, part of the discussion now, which is ingrained into your brain. We, people, never asked for this.
Haram. Ça tombe bien, je suis chrétienne. Ah ouais? Bah ouais. Français donc.
Disgusting. So there's a man off screen. He shouts haram, haram, and then in French the lady does respond and says, "It's a good thing I'm Christian." And he just appears to laugh. Then again, the arrogance on display with a lot of these people that have adopted this ideology, which is one of the stupidest ideologies ever to grace the planet, should we say. But again, more and more women are realizing the danger that we're in, danger that they're in, sorry. We're all in danger, women more so than anybody else. So you have this example. You also have a lady venting her frustrations on social media from Berlin. So she is sharing what it looks like on a daily basis in European cities now. You'd be hard-pressed to find a European person. You go to London, you'd be hard-pressed to find a British person. You go to many of these cities. Saw a really troubling stat coming out of, I believe it was Brussels in Belgium, where I think it was about 88% of births are from foreigners. 80% of the new births in Belgium are coming from foreigners. Think about it, or at least in Brussels anyway. Oh, it might have been, no, I think it's in Vienna. Sorry, in Belgium. I think it was Vienna, the place where that historic stand against the Muslims took place about 150 years ago, 170 years ago. And now you have, in many instances, where the same countries where those people as conquerors before were coming from, and now making up nearly 90% of the births coming out of that area of the world. Truly, truly, how far we've fallen. And this is Deuteronomy 28. This is Deuteronomy 28 playing out in real time. This is Deuteronomy 28 and Revelation playing out in real time. Make no mistake about it. All European cities are like this, flooded with troublesome people who have no business being there. Everything is turned upside down. So I'm going to play this video now for you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm also going to read the subtitles as they come up, because I believe this lady is speaking, I believe she's speaking German. So just make sure this is on the right one a minute. There we are. Says, I just feel Berlin 0%. What is that? I've lived here for years, and from day to day I get even more upset. I'm so glad when I'm out of here. Who thinks it's nice? Who is behind every other corner? Someone who takes drugs. At night, there are always drunken people shouting, "Think, can I sleep please?" everywhere. Full of stores with men sitting outside watching you. If you walk past on the street, you get attacked by someone with a screw, by a stranger, without having done anything. You go to the, I don't know how to pronounce that, just want to relax and enjoy a bit of nature. Every two, just a drug dealer, you feel 0% safe. And when I get out of here alone as a woman, I always get disgustingly hit on at least once when I'm outside. I get so sick to my stomach. You're in your apartment and you hear a gunshot. Every night you hear police cars, ambulances driving around with sirens blaring. What's going on here? You go for a walk along the Hertfordshire. There are also drug dealers everywhere sitting on the benches. Tell me, where am I? Where am I? Months ago, I saw this place in new light, so that's something nice. You could call that art. What do? Destroy it. Of course. Why? So you can see there, ladies and gentlemen, this video goes on for about 2 minutes. I'm doing a really bad job of trying to keep up with her. She's speaking very fast, but yeah. And people commenting on this post saying we can't rely on the political class to fix it, but we can't rely on the political class to fix it. No, we can't. We can't necessarily rely on the political class to fix it, which is why you now see many instances of men banding together. This is very, very good to see men banding together and walking out to police their communities. It does give you that glimmer of hope that men in these communities, men in these cities, men in these towns, wherever it may be, they see what's going on and now they're realizing that they have to take matters into their own hands. Sooner or later, that's going to be the case everywhere. More and more people are realizing there's a problem. Some people have yet to mobilize together. I mean, the problem hasn't got to such an extent where they need to yet, but people are realizing that this is a problem, and people are realizing that sooner or later, this is like a creeping poison, that although it hasn't hit the communities yet, it's going to. And good thing is many people are now starting to wake up and realizing, no, we need to be proactive about this. We are lucky. In many instances, in areas like mine at the moment, we are still relatively lucky. We have a chance to be proactive about this, not reactive. We have a chance in many ways to go on the offense of this, to start solving these things before they are allowed to be massive problems, before we have the rape of our towns and communities, like we've seen in Bradford, in Oldham, in Rochdale, in Rotherham, in Glasgow, in Cardiff, in Swansea, in all of these areas. We actually have opportunity to be relatively proactive about it, which is a luxury so many people have now been denied. That opportunity for them is long past. We're very lucky in this regard. If we play our cards right, we will minimize, potentially have zero atrocity taking place in our local community. So please, ladies and gentlemen, vote wisely at the next election. The next episode, we have a lot of things to go over with some of the things the Welsh government has been saying. Very, very troubling things. But again, the government is explicit on what side of the what side they are on. So you have the thing that I was alluded to at the start of this episode, where I mentioned there was a document that was dropped on the floor. It was found on the floor outside of a Derby hotel. Now, you only need to look at the context of this letter to realize what this hotel was being used for and why it is particularly egregious. Because we're always told these asylum seekers, quote unquote, they can't claim benefits. They're on this dirt cheap wage. They're basically surviving on this, that, and the other. All of this stuff, right? And you have this letter that was dropped outside of Derby Station Hotel for a Mr. Hussein, for a Mr. S. Hussein. And it says here about this certificate for full help with health costs. You and your partner named on this certificate are entitled to the following. Now, this letter is folded in half, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to show you this letter in its entirety. So this is on X, and this is a letter that was dropped outside of the hotel. It says, free NHS prescriptions, free NHS dental treatment, free NHS site tests, the full value of a voucher towards the cost of glasses and contact lenses, free NHS wigs and fabric supports, refund of necessary costs of travel to receive NHS treatment. Do you get any of these benefits, ladies and gentlemen? No, of course you don't. You have to pay for this. You have to pay for this. But people coming across on small boats, these economic migrants coming across on these small boats, coming across from the safe country for these people known as France, again, not very safe for a French person, but very safe for these people with the traitorous government that France has. And we keep getting told that they're not getting this. They don't get access to the NHS. They can't obviously pay into the system. They don't get these benefits. Well, quite clearly they do. Not only that, we covered on the podcast before, ladies and gentlemen, about times that people have gone into these hotels and we've found that these people have been given free private healthcare. Not even just healthcare on the NHS. They've been given free private healthcare. Tells you a lot about the society we live in. That the government is bending over backwards for these people. Why is the government bending over backwards for these people, whereas the waiting lists for NHS hospitals are getting longer and longer? Public services are on their fucking knees as it is. They're the worst performing, in Wales in particular, they're the worst performing because all of these institutions are ideologically corrupted. Because me and you, no matter how much we pay, we don't deserve. We don't deserve it. These people deserve everything via their status as oppressed peoples. That's why the government will bend over backwards. They're completely ideologically corrupted. The British person is always evil in the eyes of the government. Even the useful idiots. The British useful idiots like the people at Glastonbury. We're talking about that in the next episode as well. Who champion their own destruction. The government sees them as nothing but useful idiots. The same way the rabid Islamists do. Same way the rabid Muslims do. And they see, queers for Palestine and stuff like that. Useful idiots for their political movements. Meanwhile, they're taking everything from you and giving it to foreigners who have no business being here. How this doesn't piss you off, I'll never know. Say what you want, ladies and gentlemen. It's not on me and you to save the world. It's not on me and you to save the world. It's not on Britain. It's not on America. It's not on all of these countries to be 100% responsible for all the world's problems. Just because, at one point or another, we were a successful country. Because of things like our morals, our outlook on things. Our outlook on life. A hard-working, stiff-upper-lip attitude, all of these things. But no, we're all just full up with white privilege and all of that stuff, right? And we got to give everything over to the habitually oppressed, the eternally oppressed foreigners. Whenever you hear the term now, ladies and gentlemen, whenever you hear the term white privilege, I want you to think of videos like this. I want you to think of videos like this that show real trauma, real suffering. Such as our young boys, our men that came back from the Great War. Bloody, beaten, scarred, physically and mentally, emotionally. I want you to watch this video and show this to your liberal friend next time they tell you to check your white privilege, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're on watching, you're seeing horrific shell shock and post-traumatic stress disorder on these young gentlemen. His lip is quivering. He's in a very rhythmic, stuck in this cycle. This guy can't walk. Where this guy, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see and bring it up on the big screen for you. He's terrified. He's terrified of the cap that he would have worn in the war. Look at this. Do you want to know where this 1,000-yard stare comes from? It comes from things like this. Don't ever, with the sacrifices our previous generation have made, don't you ever lecture me on quote-unquote white privilege ever again. The sacrifices we made to end the slave trade, that now we're still being financially raped for reparations by foreign governments. When we paid our debts to the fucking slave trade, not only fiscally, but in our blood, in the blood of our forebears in the empire, we paid our fucking debts. We owe you nothing. We owe you absolutely nothing. And contrary to our Bob Villain or Bob Violin, whatever the fuck his name is, contrary to what he says and thinks, we will have our countries back. We will have our countries back. It's not a matter for debate. It's not a matter of if, but when and how. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, we win. And I'll do it for the show today. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you find it useful. Not exactly something that you can enjoy. Hope you find it useful. Nothing else. Don't let anybody ever lecture you about white privilege and white guilt, white fragility, all of this stuff, ever again. Have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Diolch yn fawr. Hwyl fawr. See you next time. And take care. Godspeed.